very much. We've just been told that the governor will be here momentarily, and he apologizes for the delay. He's doing 6 or 7 things today, and his previous one did get held up. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the Mayor of Teaneck, Mayor Hamadouda. Shalom Aleichem. It gives me great honor to be here today. John just told me I got 3 minutes. Hey, you ready? So I'm winging it. Throughout the last 3 years, my story has been tied to the observant Orthodox community. And I feel such warmth whenever I'm here. I feel like I'm at home. So I feel it necessary. I was talking, when we talk about what's happening within the Jewish day schools, and the problems that we're facing as a religious community when we talk about family planning that are similar issues with the Muslim community, when we talk about family planning issues and how we're going to pay for daycare. I think it's important that we let our political leaders know that next year we're going to want to see some action on this. That it's not just words, it's not just showing up, it's not just having breakfast with us, but we want to be able to say that, hey, your job is to represent everybody. And I am in here full support of the positions of the Orthodox Union when it comes to making education affordable for the Jewish community, for every community throughout the state of New Jersey. I'd also like to just... And I know Congressman Pascrell touched on this, and I think it would behoove me to say this, but the situation that's going on right now in Iran is a very dangerous situation, to say the least. And I think that we should all be monitoring that situation because it affects not only Israel, it affects the entire Middle East and the entire world. So words of former presidents who go from saying being Holocaust deniers to now saying that the Holocaust did exist, I don't know what to say other than exactly what Netanyahu said was, oh, thank you. Which was, just the exact absurdity of this situation. So I encourage all of you to make sure that you stay vigilant on this because it affects all of us. With that, I'm glad you guys enjoyed. I'm glad everyone enjoyed the holidays and you've survived and you've put on a few pounds. I've enjoyed putting on a few pounds with you, and I hope to see you next year. Very much. At this time, I'd like to introduce Josh Brzezinski. For those of you who do not know Josh, he's on his way in. For those of you who don't know Josh, he is our local advocate in Trenton. Without him, and without the work of his committee and Maury Lidwack and others, nothing would get done. Nothing at all would be able to get done to support our causes. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Josh Brzezinski, who's going to introduce the governor. Honored Governor, elected officials, honored rabbis, sponsors, friends, supporters, and volunteers, thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Josh Brzezinski, New Jersey Regional Director of the Orthodox Union Advocacy Center, and I approve this message. We are all acutely aware that the #1 kitchen table issue in our community is educational affordability. A few years ago, the Orthodox Union, under the leadership of Dr. Simcha Katz, the OU began investing resources to open state advocacy offices. And New Jersey was the very first. I am honored to have been chosen to be director of the first of now 4 offices. To Dr. Katz, immediate past president of the OU, we thank you. We also express our appreciation to other OU leaders who support and promote the work of the OU Advocacy Center, particularly OU President Marty Nachemson and the OU Advocacy Chairman Yehuda Newberger. And I thank the senior professional leadership of OU Advocacy
our Director of State Affairs and Outreach, and the Executive Director of the OU Advocacy Center, Nathan Diamond. But for us to have a real chance of success in our efforts, the OU needs partners. One individual who stepped up to the plate in order to move this initiative forward quickly is our good friend, Sammy Sacco. Sammy, president of the Hillel Yeshiva in Deal, in his usual zealous style, worked on this even though he has a tremendously loaded schedule. His drive to succeed has catapulted our efforts to unexpected heights. Sammy, thank you for everything. We'd also like to thank Jonathan Gellis, Barry Sklar, and as well as all the other members of our leadership team for their dedication to this cause. Wow, I'm here anyway. I got another minute to jump right now. Sorry. Just we're stalling for a little bit of time. So, Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to welcome our Governor, Christie. Now, a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to join the governor on his first and probably at this point only foreign trip to Israel, the only trip in his first term to Israel. And it was a wonderful experience, especially walking to the Western Wall, which we have all done many times, and being greeted like a rock star with cameras and babies, and all these New Jersey people just happened to have been there at the same time. One story I'd like to share with you that stands out is Ambassador Dan Shapiro gave us a briefing at the King David Hotel the last day of the trip. And Ambassador Shapiro said, the only way that Israel and the Palestinians will make peace is if they both learn to trust each other when they negotiate and trust each other to make a settlement. I rose up and I said, Mr. Ambassador, please tell our president and give him the following message. Tell him this is Josh Przansky, and I suggest that he bring the Israelis and Palestinians to Trenton, New Jersey, to the State House, to sit down with Governor Christie. Because if he was able to get the Democrats and Republicans to vote for pension and benefit reform and tenure reform, he can get the Arabs and Palestinians and Israelis to make peace. Starts going like this. He's shaking his head. He says, I knew I should have left Josh back in New Jersey. After what I'm about to say, he's going to shake his head and say, I knew I should have left him back in Israel. My friends, we are here today. We have an issue that is not a Democrat issue, not a Republican issue, and not even a political issue. It's a matter of educational opportunity for all of our children. It's a matter of equality. It's a matter of free choice. And some might even say it's a matter of civil rights. We live in a state where there are two classes of people when it comes to educating our children. Consider two families. Both families pay property taxes. Both have 60% or more of that burden that is earmarked for education. However, only those who avail themselves of public education see any benefit, while the families of 10% of the total amount of school children in this state who go to non-public schools see very little or nothing of their investment. Why is that? Society benefits when all children receive a quality education. This is the basis for the idea of public education. Free public schools are one means to provide educational opportunity, but they are far from the only means. Non-public schools, charter schools, online schools, and homeschooling serve the same goal by providing parents with the means to educate their own children as only a child's parent knows is best for their child. We need our state government to provide a funding mechanism that would assist working-class families by reducing costs as a barrier to educational opportunity. And doing so can save money, improve educational outcomes, and crucially, make society more equitable. Governments already use markets and choice to advance a wide range of social goals. States allow Medicaid recipients to choose their health provider. The federal government allows food stamp recipients to choose their diet, and housing voucher recipients to choose their apartment. The federal government allows Pell Grant and direct loan recipients to choose their college. The goal of providing quality education to all students in grades K to 12 should be no different. Now let me make myself perfectly clear. Our community in no way wants the state to pay for the instruction of religious education. We are asking that the state provide support for middle-class tax-paying families that supports a secular curriculum in their schools. Mandated upon them by the state's compulsory education requirement. We want the help of each person in this room in getting the state of New Jersey to either offer educational tax credits to working class families or to provide the instruction of secular education in all schools. We want the legislature to pass the Special Education Bill S-1929 and A-2869. This bill will help families that care for their special needs child, our most vulnerable children. The legislation will ensure fair and equitable treatment of special needs children from religious families alongside every such family in New Jersey. We need that bill passed by the legislature this November and signed by the governor to help those families afford to educate their children in funding to be equal for all children in the area of health, security, technology, and transportation. Every child deserves the same health care, the same secure school building, the same technological equipment, and the same rules for transportation. If a child resides between 2 and 20 miles from their school, they should be bused regardless of whether there is a public school child being bused in that school district. We need to move forward on these proposals and make life a little bit more affordable for these hard-working, tax-paying citizens. We don't want this crisis to hit such epidemic proportions that our schools would have to close. What use would that be? It would end up costing taxpayers at today's cost over $4 billion per year to absorb these children into the public schools. What we seek is a mere fraction of what it would cost if our children went to public schools. In New York and Pennsylvania, funding sources already exist that make non-public school education more affordable than here in New Jersey. However, we want to stay here in New Jersey. I invite each of you to work with us to help make that happen. Our keynote speaker, a man who really needs no introduction. What our governor does deserve is a thank you. I first met him back in May of 2009 when he was running before the Republican primary. What he said was his vision and goals back then have remained true until today. He is a man who says what he means and means what he says. But the respect and recognition his administration has for the Orthodox Jewish community in this state is definitely noticed and appreciated. Unprecedented access to the highest levels in the state government. I have had many conversations with the Lieutenant Governor and other members of his cabinet over these past 4 years, ranging from education, red tape for businesses, homeland security, community affairs, environmental, and DDD, Department of Developmental Disabled, etc. And in each case, I have found the commissioners and their staffs willing to do whatever they can to accommodate the requests we have made, and even if they could not, they always tried and were very helpful. Unfortunately, some prior administrations, that has not always been the case. Governor Christie sets the tone for his staff, and they follow suit. And for that, we are most grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, let us all rise and give a big OU welcome. And it's my honor and privilege to introduce you to the Governor of the State of New Jersey, Christie.
folks from both sides of the political aisle being here this morning. See Congressman Pasquarelli here. I always appreciate him being here in the state and doing the work that he does for the people of the state. And now, apparently, Congressman Pasquarelli has become a political advisor to me. I read recently in the newspapers that he thinks I should be on TV more than I am already. And Congressman, I appreciate your kind and heartfelt advice, and look forward to doing it as much as I possibly can, especially in the next 30 days. So, other members of the state legislature here, like Senator Weinberg, Assemblywoman Huddle, and others. I'm sure I've missed some, but those are the two I see right up in front. I want to thank all of you for being here. Smiling over the shoulder of Assemblywoman Huddle, which I don't think is something that normally happens, is Senator Cardinale. And so we are bringing people together here this morning, and I thank the folks here at OU for inviting me and for your friendship and advice and counsel over the years. It is always dangerous when someone like Josh says, here's a man who needs no introduction, and then gives me the longest introduction and the entirety of it. But a heartfelt introduction nonetheless, Josh, and I thank you for that. There's lots of issues that we hold in common and care about very, very much. From funding to school choice, to charter schools, to taking care of students with special needs, all of which Josh mentioned in his introduction. Your commitment to high-quality education has made a difference in many, many lives of the citizens of New Jersey. I commend you for the efforts. I stand with you on those efforts, and I'm here today to let you know that I share that very same commitment with all of you. You know that I believe we need to provide each and every child in New Jersey with an outstanding education. And the reason we need to do that is very simple. No matter where you live, no matter what your economic background, no matter what your ethnicity, no matter what faith you observe, the one thing that we know for sure in this country is that a quality education is the thing that opens doors for each and every person, no matter who they are or where they've come from. And we also know that our state spends more money on public education than any state in the union. And that investment is reflective of the attitude of New Jerseyans, that there is nothing more important than a quality education for our children. Yet, I would suggest to you that in many ways, we have failed in that commitment. When we have 200 public schools in New Jersey that are failing, you can look at that two different ways. Some say, well, there's 2,200 schools in New Jersey, and 200 failing is acceptable. Acceptable. You actually have people seeking high office in this state who say that having 200 schools that are failing in New Jersey is acceptable. And I assume for those folks it is acceptable, because I assume their children don't go to one of those 200 schools that are failing in New Jersey. You see, because if your child is going to one of those 200 failing schools, then you live in a perpetual state of both outrage and sadness. Outrage because there are people in this state who believe that having 200 failing schools is acceptable, and sadness because you know that your child will not reach their full God-given potential. And let's stop there for a second and remember this. That these gifts that we decide whether to exploit or not to their fullest are gifts from God. And our failure to exploit those gifts for every child in this state, in my opinion, is a sin. sin and it is immoral. And yet, we have some in this state who say, when looking at this failed system, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We'll fix it eventually. Let's throw more money at it. Because at least the throwing of money at it will at least quell our guilt. We could say, well, we've spent more, so you can't blame us. It's someone else's fault. Let me be really clear this morning with an audience that I know is passionate about this issue. We will not fix those 200 failing schools, and we will not help the thousands and tens of thousands of children in those schools until we change the underlying failed system that created those failure factories in the first place. And I need you to be with me on that. In every other aspect of American life, we believe that competition creates excellence. In every other area of American life, we say that our system of democracy, our system of free enterprise, our system of challenging everyone to be their best and reach their full potential is what contributes mightily to the idea that excellence is available for everyone in this country in a way that is different than most countries around the world. Except in public education. In public education, we are sold a bill of goods in this state and across this country that says, this is the one place where accountability and competition have no place. We must trust that everyone will just do their best, not test it, not hold those who fail accountable, not reward those who succeed, and not bring competition into the most important task we ask of our children, which is to learn and to grow. And so, for some folks in this audience and for people like me who have the economic wherewithal to be able to choose a separate path for our children, for whatever reason, we can take a different road. But for the most part, for those families in those 200 failing schools in New Jersey, they cannot take another path. They have been consigned by the political powers that be in this state to one path: the walk to a neighborhood school which is failing. That is immoral. Those families, because of their economic circumstance, are being told, you must accept failure. And by the way, you must pay handsomely for it as well. If you go to the city of Newark, and we're paying $24,000 per pupil per year, and you are not one of the chosen few who can get into an excellent charter school, but you're one of the thousands on a waiting list for one, failure is your destiny. If you're in Asbury Park, where we pay $30,000 per pupil per year, and 2 years ago, less than 50% of the graduates of Asbury Park High School could read at an 8th grade level, we say you shouldn't have the opportunity to take a voucher and send your child to a different school outside the Asbury Park school system. No, we say continue to pay your property taxes in Asbury Park, keep quiet, and wait for us to fix it. Well, these families have been waiting decades for us to fix it. And the only people who have benefited from that system are the adults entrenched in that system with higher salaries, higher benefits, and lifetime pensions. That's what people are standing up to protect Oh, and one other thing. The millions, and in my case, tens of millions of dollars that they spend against those who dare to call this system what it is, which is a failure for the families who need it most. Because remember this, for someone like me, whose parents, I was fortunate enough to be taken out of Newark to Livingston, to an outstanding public school system, so that I could be the first member of my family ever to go to graduate school, so that I could grow up to be governor of this state. For folks like me, life continues on a fortunate and successful path, not just for me, but for my children. But those who need it most, those whose lives are filled with economic challenge and societal difficulties, those are the ones that we're serving the least. And the folks who stand up to oppose the things that Josh talked about in his introduction, that would candidly, disproportionately benefit the most needy in our society, the people who stand up to oppose that are the very people who represent them. It is the greatest irony in this state that we don't have educational choice today, not because the legislators, Republican or Democrat, in the suburbs stand up and oppose educational choice. It is because of the representatives, the elected representatives of those in our most challenged and failing school districts who stand up and oppose it. Why? Why? How is it logical? When you have thousands of families sitting on waiting lists for charter schools in Newark and Camden and Trenton and Jersey City and Patterson, those parents are speaking. They're screaming. They are screaming for help. And those who represent them turn a deaf ear. A deaf ear. Years ago, when I was U.S. Attorney, I went to the Robert Treat Academy in the city of Newark, one of the best charter schools in this state. Has a 90% minority enrollment. African American and Hispanic children from the city of Newark, with some of the best reading and math scores of any school in New Jersey. Not just of an urban school, but of any school. And I met a mother there whose son had gotten in through the lottery in kindergarten. He was now in the 3rd grade. I got introduced to her, we started to talk, and I said to her, what was it like the night you were sitting in that gym waiting to see if your son's lottery number was going to be selected to go to this school? And she said to me, Chris, I sat there that night knowing that whether he got picked or not was going to be the difference between him going to college or going to jail. Now imagine any one of you in this audience this morning, imagine yourselves in that same position. Close your eyes and think about the most precious things we have in our lives, our children. And imagine if you were confronted with the choice of the bounce of a ball or the selection of a piece of paper out of a barrel was going to be the difference between whether your beloved son or daughter was going to reach their full God-given potential or whether they were going to go to jail. Not because of what you've done as a mother or father, but because of the luck of the draw. That is the system that political leaders in this state have imposed upon minority children in this state, in our worst schools, because they refuse to stand up and fight the powers who fund their campaigns, who fund endless television commercials telling you that those 200 failing schools are somebody else's fault. They blame it on parents, some of whom are working 3 and 4 jobs in a household to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. They blame administrators and politicians. And believe me, there's plenty of blame to go around. But I will tell you that the things that frustrate me as governor are not the unsolvable problems, the mysteries of unfairness in our lives where no one can quite get their arms around the problem to figure out a solution. The things that frustrate me in this job are the problems that continue to infect our state when we know what the answer is, but we don't have the courage to implement it. I'm here this morning to say to all of you who understand this issue personally and better than many, that the crisis point has been reached and passed. And the time to sit here and console ourselves with the idea that we're paying a lot of money towards failed public education, so therefore we shouldn't feel guilty about it because it must be someone else's fault. I'd suggest respectfully to all of you this morning, it is our fault. It is our fault because we are unwilling to stand up and fight. It is our fault. And when I said earlier that there are others who say having 200 failing schools is acceptable, this is someone who doesn't understand what it means to be governor. Because once you become governor, you know what you realize? Every one of these children is your child. This is the most important issue in this state. Because growing inequality, a growing gap, achievement gap, the largest achievement gap in America exists in this state. And those who try to say they're for the poor and the middle class are the same ones who are complicit in keeping their foot on the throats of these families. It's 30 days from an election, and elections are important things, and they have consequences. And if you care about the issue of educational choice, which I hear from almost every member of this community, no matter where I travel in this state, some of the loudest and strongest and bravest voices come from this community, then you better figure out you all better figure out where everybody who's on the ballot in November stands on this issue. And don't let them give you the hoo-ha about, well, I love public education. I don't want any dollar taken away from public education. Let me tell you, I would be happy to take as many dollars as possible away from failure factories that send children on a no-stop route to prison and to failed dreams. If we can take that money and put it into a place where those families have hope. This is a moral issue, everybody. It's a moral issue. And there are tons of folks out there who are excuse makers for what's happening in our state. just remember, 200 failing schools is acceptable. Acceptable. It's not acceptable to me. And while we have made some progress, we haven't made nearly enough. And it's not going fast enough. And if we're truly going to say that our society is one where competition fosters greatness, then it is time. In fact, it is well over time to bring competition to our educational system. And so you need to decide. What the last 4 years have proven to you is that no matter how loud my voice is, and it tends to be loud sometimes, no matter how much I stand up to those interests and take $20+ million of TV ads in return that try to sell to you because I am for this, I am against children. No matter how much I do it on my own, and even if you give me another 4 years to do it on my own, I can't do it on my own. So you need to decide who you're going to stand up and support. You need to decide, is this that important an issue to you? Because I hear it from your community all the time, that this is a foundational issue, this issue of educational choice. Well, if it is, anyone who comes to you and asks you for your vote in the next 30 days, if this is a foundational issue, you better ask them that question. And don't let them out of your handshake until they answer you. And not with, I'll look at it, I'll examine it, I'll think about it. Hell, everybody, we've been looking at this thing for decades. There's nothing to look at anymore. It's decision time. It's decision time. So, I care deeply for this community and the values you represent. I believe you when you tell me that this is a foundational issue that you believe is also got the potential to be a transformational one. I agree with you. Who else agrees with you? Don't let them out of this room today until you ask them whether they agree with us. Don't let them out of your grasp in the next 30 days, because let me tell you, the next 30 days defines what they really care about. Because politicians are easy, everybody. We want to win. If we don't win, people stop returning our phone calls. Okay? It's easy. I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, independent. I don't care if you're communist. The goal is to win and be an authority so you can govern. So this is your moment in the next 30 days. Because you're going to decide who wins and loses. And so now's your time to get some commitments that you're going to hold folks to. You have my commitment, and you've had it for the last 4 years. I'll end with this. Tell you how many times people come to me after I speak on this topic and say, man, you're hot on this issue, aren't you? You get more worked up about this than I see you get worked up about almost anything. And people can't quite understand why. It's really simple, and I alluded to it before, but I'll spell it out plainly to you now. I was born in the city of Newark. Brought home to a 4th-floor apartment on the corner of South Orange Avenue and 14th Street, a building that no longer exists. It's just an empty lot right across from West Side High School, where my mother graduated in 1950. Back to her old neighborhood, where she grew up. I lived there until I was almost 5. My grandparents lived in Newark on both sides. My great-grandparents immigrated to Newark. That's where my family was from, both sides. But in 1967, my parents left. They left because they became convinced that if they kept me in the Newark public school system, that I would have no chance to get a great education. So they borrowed $1,000 from my maternal grandmother and $1,000 from my paternal grandmother. And they took that money and put a down payment on a $22,000 house in Livingston. My mother complained to her mother that my father was moving her to the wilderness. A woman who spent her whole life in Newark saw Livingston as the wilderness. They brought me and my brother and then ultimately my sister there because they didn't have the money to pay for me to go and pursue another course of my education. If I was going to get an education, it was going to be in the public system, and so they left to take me there. And I know in my heart, as certain as I know anything, that if they had not done that, I would not be here. I would not be the governor of New Jersey if they had not moved me out of that school system. That is not to say that there are not some successes that come out of that system. But what it does say is that's the luck of the draw. I look at my classmates from my graduating class at Livingston High School in 1980, and I see a parade of success. So what that makes me wonder, and I hope what it makes you wonder is, how many children today are preparing to go to school tomorrow in one of these 200 failing schools in our state, who have every gift from God that they would need to someday become governor of this state, but won't. But won't, because we didn't have the guts or the will to fight for them. That we cared more about the comfort of adults than we cared about the potential of children. That's why it's personal to me. There, but for the grace of God, go I. There, but for my grandmother's willingness to give my parents $1,000 each, and my parents' vision for something better for their children's future, and the luck that those resources actually were there at that moment, go I. That should not be the way this state or this country operates. Success always has an element of luck, but it shouldn't be governed by